Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. And thank you for coming along to the last instalment of this lecture series, which is titled Imagining Otherwise. Titled after Lola Olufemi's Experiments in Imagining Otherwise, this lecture series learns from established practices that shift the focus away from European context or knowledge systems. We will navigate the space between what is and what could be, weaving through an exploration of identities and possibility of living otherwise. And tonight we're very pleased to be joined by Vanley Burke for the final lecture. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
To introduce Vanley Burke is a photographer using his position and perspective to produce work that seeks to counteract negative or stereotypical images of Black people in mainstream media. His photographs capture experiences of his community's arrival in Britain, representing members of the Black community back to themselves in an intimate portrayal. He explores and examines the different landscapes and cultures he has encountered, the different ways of survival, and the experiences of the wider African Caribbean community. Vanley's first notable exhibition, Handsworth from the Inside, was held at Icon Gallery in Birmingham and then the Commonwealth Institute of London in 1983. Since then, his work has been exhibited at the Lighthouse, Birmingham Museum and the Art Gallery, and the Black Arts Gallery in London, Corner House in Manchester, and the Warsaw Museum, as well as the Warsaw Museum and Art Gallery. In line with his focus, Vanley additionally exhibited his works in locations more accessible to Black audiences, such as community centres, pubs, churches, and schools. His work remains a feature in Birmingham with the Vanley Burke Archive, a constantly growing community resource which provides insights into daily activities and everyday lives, cultural and religious beliefs, the arts, political ideals, health, and other facets affecting the Black community and others in Birmingham and in Britain widely. Vanley continues to photograph the Black community in the UK and has recently worked on a number of projects, including an exhibition and publication projects documenting the Asian community in Birmingham. Tonight we're very thrilled to have you present your work. So Vanley will give a presentation, and after which there'll be time for a conversation and comments. And so please do prepare your questions and we'll take them as the floor opens. Thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thanks for inviting me here. We met briefly at an exhibition in Manchester. What was it?
Whitworth, Althea McNeish.
Yeah, Althea McNeish. And I think I was quite intrigued. We started talking and you told me you're in architecture. And for me, that was fascinating because at the time I was and still am looking for an architect for various reasons. The purpose for that at the time is where to house the archive that I've accumulated. Where does it belong? I felt, and perhaps I need to go a little bit, start at the beginning, because mine is really about journeys and stories. So I'm one of the Windrush children. I'm one of the ones that's commonly referred to as the left behind. Although I really been thinking about that recently, and I don't think I'm one of the left behinds because the left behinds are still there. So I'm one of the late arrival, if you like. My mother came here when I was about 3 years old. I lived with my grandparents, and we lived rural. It's pretty rural. I described it. I had the opportunity to do Desert Island Disc as well. And in there I described where I live, in that interview, where I lived as if you imagine taking a car towards your destination, and when the car can't go anymore, you jump on a donkey, and when the donkey can't go anymore, I live around the corner. That's how rural it is. So imagine living in that environment when we received a camera. I received a camera which was in one of the many parcels that we would have from our families who were living in England at the time. This would be sent at birthday, Christmas and other times like that. And there's this camera, I'd never seen this thing before. I mean, when I say rural, we used to plug the radio into a battery. I used to look in the back of the radio to see if anyone who was talking. We didn't have cars, you know, hadn't seen a car, you know, all of this time. So there's this camera. What we would have, my relationship with photography would be this man who would come around on a Sunday and he would take photographs of the people in the community and so on. And I did have one such photograph taken and sent back to England just to say, you know, look, he's fattening up all right, you know, it's okay. So anyway, imagine this camera, Kodak Brownie 127, you know, arrived in the box, and it was just fascinating. You know, how did the image get from there to here? You know, he started investigating, and he'd been quite inquisitive. And it was more the science, and then later on, as I developed, I lived with an aunt, and I remember my first photograph, which I still have a copy of somewhere, and it was of a house that she had made. So after my mother came to England, I lived with my grandparents, and then my grandparents came to England 5 years, well, in the 60s, 1960, and I lived with an aunt. I was there for 5 years. I described her as the aunt from hell, but I've had to reassess my relationship with her, because I don't think if it wasn't for her, then perhaps I wouldn't be able to do what I've done. So after living with her, my turn was to come to England, and I thought it was a great escape. You know, I was coming to England. So I arrived in this place. I thought it couldn't be as bad as many people described it. You know, the cold mainly was the description. So when I arrived, like most people, we thought, well, the houses were, you know, looked like they were all factories, because we didn't have, where I lived, the closest building was some distance away. You know, we didn't have, it was just rolling hills. We lived on the top of the hill. We lived in a place which you can Google, I do frequently, which is Mango Row or Maley, that sort of area, in St. Thomas, the foothills of Blue Mountain. So when I came here, we had a shop on Grove Lane, and I had heard the story before, and I think somehow I've been trying to think back where all of this, you know, where the seeds were planted of my interest in documenting and interest in just Black life. And I remember when I was at kindergarten, I was told a story. This is still in Jamaica. I was told a story about which I equated it with the Morant Bay Rebellion. And we would be in the thick of the Morant Bay Rebellion, really. And for those who don't know, it's, you know, about Paul Bogle and so on, which is sung about and written about greatly. And it was the torture and the cruelty that was meted out to these people over that period of time that I think grabbed me. I heard stories of these people hiding in caves, and I remember at that tender age thinking it would be great to find one of these caves with relics of this slave trade, of their experience, not the slave trade, relics of their experience still there. If there was a cave that they might have left something in, would I be able to, you know, find this thing? So I think I've been kind of looking for that cave ever since. So when I came here, and we had a shop, and I was engaging with you know, the customers who came. We sold groceries, by the way. I would ask their stories, and somehow, while they all had a story, they weren't really good storytellers. And I felt really that at some point, I need to start thinking about this story. But if I might just tell you a little bit more about how the photography developed. The camera was by then a little bit, when you came here, you know, I used to, you see sort of proper cameras, really, you know, better cameras. And I remember looking at in our area, it was a chemist, Mark's the chemist on Soho Road, that used to sell cameras, and there were these wonderful cameras in the shop, and I remember looking at the camera, you know, 15, 20 minutes I'll stand just looking at the cameras and pairing up which one is a good one. And I remember started saving my pocket money. I think it was like 6p a week, you know, out of a shilling to get this, but that didn't really work. So I pursued by, I think I bought a couple of cheap cameras, and then I, you know, elevated my equipment to a Praktica Nova 1B, you know, still remember the name of it. And I just started taking photographs within the community. I felt, and I remember clearly where I was standing when I felt that I was quite privileged and that I would, to be witnessing the arrival of black people in Britain, and that I would use my experience, if you like, to document the lives and experience as we begin it. I thought it, unlike previous experiences, I thought this was particularly unique, and we're here to stay. And therefore this record must be written. It was quite clear that, while many records had been written before, we didn't participate in that process, and it was imperative that we did, because somehow we didn't trust the record that was being written. By then I'd been affiliated to local groups of people who were referred to as self-help organization, looking at rights for individuals, black people, police harassment, housing, mental health, that sort of thing. And I thought, well, I need to. So I started taking photographs, and I decided whatever I couldn't photograph, I would collect, hence the archive. And so I had to devise a way of taking these photographs. I bet you're all wondering, why haven't we seen any of them yet? And I thought to myself, we didn't have mentors in those days. So I couldn't go to the person and sit and say, look, I've got this idea, how do I approach it? And then I remember I had a friend in Jamaica, and we would talk about people in England and what life was like here. And we would come up with all of these stories. And if you like, I created this idea of I'm taking the photograph of this, my friend, who's still in Jamaica. And so I'll be telling him or answering some of those questions that we had posed as youngsters out there. So I divided it into different sections. So it would be like religious, political, social, all of these different topics, frameworks, if you like, and then I tried to populate those frameworks with cameras, with photographs. But as time went on, it became much more complex. So if I was doing music, at one time it might have been reggae music, and then it went on to lovers rock, and then it moved into something else, and then you find, the drum and bass and the Rasta community and the drumming and all of these sort of things. So it became more, and you had to try and contain all of that sort of thing. So, so that's, if you like, the framework under which I worked. And I decided that I work within the community in Handsworth. I didn't need to come to London, and I didn't need to go anywhere else, really, because whatever we have in Birmingham, in particular, was just replicated. We still had those front rooms which was just the same in Manchester or London or Bristol. So why not just photograph Birmingham? Why am I going to waste my time to go around? And I felt I could do a better job if I just stayed there. So I started taking photographs. So by then I was teaching myself photography as well. I went to school at the evening classes. The seller of the shop, I used to hang a sheet at the back and just try to photograph people. My grandparents had a house, so the whole house at the back of the house, this is good for you architectural people. I converted that, with my uncle's help, I converted that into a dark room. The first time I went on the roof, it fell in, so he repaired that for me, and he put a sink in. And while all my friends were going to parties, I was in there. I would go in the dark room in the night, and I would come out in the light in the morning, really. And this was daily. I just wanted to be there. And I won't bore you with all of that. I guess you want to see some pictures, and there's a lot to get through, so I'll jump that little bit. There's a lot of talk around if you want to find out a little bit more about all of that. So this exhibition, these photographs that I'm going to show you by the Rivers of Birmingham, curated by Linda Morris, whom I haven't seen for a while now and wonder where she is. I lost contact with her. So these, if you like, a retrospective of the photographs that I've taken over the years, and they were shown recently in Birmingham. They were initially shown at the MAC in Birmingham, and have subsequently been shown at various places, including, in South Africa and various places. So. If I might just give you 2 seconds. to read that. So the idea really was just, as you can see, it's a retrospective of the work that I've done. How do you collate, the body of work into making some sense or the other? Because I didn't work on projects as such. I worked on the whole, documentation of Black people is the project, and within that, there are smaller elements, that I need to fulfill that purpose. So this is one of the earlier photographs of a young man in his room. As you can see, he's playing with his toy car, which would have been the presents that we were given. You can see the lino on the floor, the dressing table. This is where you would have one room, which one family would live in one room, and you would share the communal spaces, such as the kitchen, the corridors, bathroom, and they would be cleaned by members of each family. They would take turn to do it. But you used to always get one young man in the the young guy who really doesn't want to to take part in all of this, and you have a cabinet in your kitchen where you'd lock all your grocery things, but this guy would come in and sometimes he'd take off the back of the cabinet to get in, to get the stuff out, You have to be resourceful. This is a party. So the idea really was to wherever these people were, wherever they engaged, conversation, anything they did, it wasn't for me to ask why, it was for me to document. Are you able to see all right, bending back like that? I'm not quite sure if I should be telling you about each photograph, but let me stop from time to time and tell you. These young women, I was passing and I saw them, they were singing. I didn't put them on the stage. They were just there singing. They were being the Supremes, and I passed and I saw them. But what's interesting about the photographs, because you can see that was in the 1970, a lot of these people are big women now, grandparents in their own rights, and the one with her hand over her face, I saw her recently. She's a grandmother, and it's just, for me, the thing about these images is they're alive because I still meet the people from time to time, and if I don't meet them, I meet their grandchildren, or there's always this conversation. The last time I was in London and I went back, I was just going in the lift to my flat, and this young woman said to me, are you the one who takes the photographs? I said yes, and she says, wonderful photographs. So you still have this interaction with these people, which is just wonderful. This has become one of my most popular photographs, and this is, I met this young man, Winfred, in the park. I knew his family, and I had just bought a Nikon camera, not too dissimilar to Beresford over there, and I was exploring, the environment with my camera, with my camera. So what happened is I had gone. At the shop, you had to do your chores. You don't just get up and go out. That's no black kids in those days. And especially girls, you don't even go out. You have to wash, you have to clean, you have to do this, you have to. So we had to do the groceries and things before. And in those days, we didn't have, you didn't get a plastic bag of rice. We had to get 100-pound bag of rice, and you have to wrap individual pounds of bags of rice. You have to wrap them out individually. So we had to do all of that. And then my escape was just to go around and explore. And I went in the park. And as I was walking down, this young man whizzed past me with this flag. And I thought, wow. Because for me at the time, it was a little bit like, I imagined like one of these Catholic kids in Belfast riding down Falls Road or wherever with a Union Jack. It just doesn't happen. And at the time, we were going through a lot of issues around identity and belonging, and the flag was just there, and he was so proud of his flag. What happened, he has made this bike himself. We didn't used to have enough money to buy the bike, so we would get the pieces and make the bikes up ourselves. And he had made this bike and was so proud of it. And he went to the bike shop, which was next door to our grocery shop, to decorate the bike, and he had the option of buying a windmill or a flag. It was as simple as that. and he bought the flag, and now his life is in misery. Because wherever this photograph appears, someone is texting him to tell him where this photograph is. So anyway, this is him. David Lammy has chosen it as his favorite photograph. He's written about it, or he's mentioned it in the Guardian a few times, and used it as his inaugural speech when he was Minister of Culture and so on. But that's the boy with the bike. This is outside the church, which is no longer there. Architecture again. They've rebuilt this church. I've got to drop that in every now and then. Yeah. After all, you're in yeah. So anyway, so these young men, they're still there. And the one on the left-hand side, Neville, he frequently sees me. He told me he was on the train at the airport and going through the airport, and someone spotted him and said, you're that man in that photograph. So yes, he told me about that, and then he said to me afterwards, he says, haven't you got another one you can use? But anyway, that's them. So we are very much linked. You know, it's almost, I don't really see it necessarily anymore as my project, more like our project. So this is Rose in the park. I was particularly interested in her. She always wore a wonderful afro, you know, and I was particularly interested in the afro. So for me, that was the interest, for taking this portrait of her. We had numerous demonstrations, as you can see here. Can't forget I've forgotten the name of the poet here. But if we must die, let it not be like hogs is a line from a Jamaican poet, lived in New York. And it was used in one of the many demonstrations. And it's amazing, again, how the photograph impact on people. For example, the young man on the left with his arms stretched out, he's actually holding a flag with the Black Panther on it. And it wasn't until his daughter saw that photograph that the relationship between the father and the daughter changed tremendously, you know. I'm not quite sure why. I think perhaps because he was active, and perhaps he isn't now or whatever, but you know, there is ongoing relationship between the photographs and the people within the photographs. Handsworth Park, again, this was Bonfire, and it was one of the very few, you know, occasion when you would have entertainment in your area. Apart from that, we would all have to provide the entertainment ourselves, you know, which came in the form of blues parties or house parties and that sort of thing. Day trip. I used to refer to this as a black man's holiday. You get a coach, a 56-seater coach, and you fill, you know, you sell the tickets, and you get a huge pot of rice and one of curry goat in the boot of the car. And, you know, you travel out to the seaside of choice. And then on the way back, you would, you know, find a space where you would have some entertainment, you know, play some music and eat some food and drink and be merry. That was your holiday. Apart from that, you would probably visit family and children, family and friends that in another city. So if you're in Birmingham, you know, you might go and stay with your family in Manchester or in London and vice versa. And yeah, so this is the bumping cars, which was the choice of the young men as they arrived and there. I later realized I did call it the black man's holiday, but it's really a working class holiday because people who, you know, poor people didn't have the chance to go anywhere, and Spain wasn't opened up at the time. So this is on the coach to the seaside. The young man on the right now, he is pretty, you know, he works in the BBC as a technical, in the technical department, you know, transmission and all of that sort of thing. So he's pretty big in the BBC, and his wife works with the Archbishop of London. She's a priest. Stuart Hall. You might all have heard of Stuart Hall. If you haven't, it might be worthwhile looking up Stuart Hall. This is when he was in Birmingham at the University of Birmingham. You might not be able to see, but he's got a cigarette in his hand there. Robert Ralph, white guy, had decided to sell his house to a white family only, had advertised it as such, and he was subsequently arrested and put in Winson Green prison, and as a result, the National Front came out in support of him, and then the anti-Nazi came out, to protest, and the police, formed a line in the middle. And obviously they weren't prepared, so they just ran to the back gardens and grabbed the dustbin lids to protect themselves. This, I found it on my way to doing, you're constantly looking and searching. And UB40 actually used it as their LP cover, one of their LP cover, Jeffrey Morgan. Writings on the wall. Here, I've covered a lot of demonstrations and so on, and of which there were many. This in particular wasn't so much a demonstration. It's a sort of it's a combination of demonstration and protest and being proud as well. And so this is Africa Liberation Day, which took place 1977 in Handsworth Park. And this event would take place in a major black city. By that I mean with a fairly large black population. And one of the biggest was this occasion in Birmingham, and they're taken to the streets. And of course, we have what I refer to as the outriders, these guys who would ride up and down the street, and they'd be able to come back and tell you in which street the SPG and the other policemen in vans are lurking to jump at you. And this is again the same event. Inspector Webb, who's credited for having started community policing. The writing on the wall reads, "Stop all state harassment." This one, again, the same event, and what's interesting with this one here, apart from Sheila Wright, the Labour politician in the middle on the lamppost, are the girls on the left-hand side. Because as the crowd, they were just there playing innocently, and as the crowd came down, they started to take a position, and, being, the ever watchful, I noticed the white girls there, they sort of slowly shuffle themselves behind the black girl. It's your crowd, and you deal with it, and so on. But it's just quite interesting to observe these little, shifts within them as it happens. This is Africa Liberation Day, Handsworth Park, and it's one of the only occasions really when the park was absolutely full with African Caribbean people. And I felt at the time, this was a very important photograph. I could, if you like, recognize its importance then, so much so I felt that I absolutely must, go up on the stage to take this photograph, of which there have been a few more as well, but this has been, again, a quite popular photograph. Again, these kids, they're young men, and they were constantly, being jostled from pillar to post, really, by various, members, not so much members, various elements within the community, and not least of all their parents as well, because the parents really didn't cotton on to the fact that these guys were being knocked about and abused, through racism and so on. They felt that there's no smoke without fire. If you wasn't there, it wouldn't have happened. So you should stay a yard and watch TV. I mean, how do you tell these young men to stay home and watch, what's his name on TV? I can't even think of the names of some of these racist programs that were Alf Garnett and the like. So what was happening here is they were jostling for position in front of the camera, and we didn't have autofocus in those days, so I had to keep going back, and before I fall, I took the picture anyway. But I had seen them, and the one just to the right of the the person in the center with the cap, I saw him some time ago, about a year ago, and he tells me that whenever they meet, they download these photographs and they use them to talk about their past, which I thought is just tremendous. And they wanted me to come and talk to them, but unfortunately I lost his number and I wasn't able to go. I did try to look for where the house might be in case I saw one of them, but I didn't. But the fact that they downloaded these photographs is the importance that that they see in them. But he did ask, why are they so pixelated? He would have liked a better quality to use. But I mean, for me, that is just the reason for taking the photographs in the first place, is how do we engage with our past? How do we engage? Because we are so busy living it, we don't really get a chance to know what's happening. And we need those quiet moments when we can sit back and engage with friends, with relatives, or new friends, and new children, and so on, to engage with those photographs. This is the Quaker City was playing in Digbeth Civic Hall. This is a blues. I don't know if does anyone here know what a blues is? No one. You must know what blues is. So, yeah. Well, a blues is a house party, but it's a little bit more than a house party, really. A blues start because the pubs close about 11 o'clock, and then you go to the club, and the clubs close at 2 o'clock, and the night is still young. So you then go to the blues, which sometimes doesn't close. It can go on for days, and these are with speaker boxes like this, described as the size of double wardrobes. And someone, again, I read an article in the Times where they described it as, you don't dance, the vibration of the music shuffles you around the floor. Windows have been known to shatter, and floors have been known to collapse into the basements and so on. And I've raided regularly by the police, who either take their drugs and sell it back, or take the drinks. I've seen they've confiscated the drinks, and they're drinking it as they're going out the front door. They're drinking the stuff that they've just confiscated. So this is it, and this was Quaker City. One of the top sound was playing in Digbeth, and it wasn't that easy to take photographs. It wasn't always easy to take photographs, and it's quite nerve-wracking sometimes because they don't know what you're going to do with the photographs. They're not used to being photographed. And I used to walk with a box of photographs like Ilford. We didn't have phone that you could load your phone up with a series of photographs and say, well, this is my photograph, this is what I'm doing. So I would walk with a box of 10/8 Ilford box of photographs, and I'd have to engage with you, tell you what I'm doing, convince you what I'm doing, and then I can take the photograph. So anyway, this was the sound system. This is James Hunt, local politician. He sadly is no more with us, and this is one of his campaign. I think he was running as independent here. He had fallen out with the Labour Party, as he did quite frequently, and I think they might have been a bit concerned about his suit. So anyway, James Hunt. This was, again, National Front. We were holding a meeting in Handsworth, and the anti-Nazi group, by that I include, people who weren't affiliated to the anti-Nazi, but people who were against the National Front. They came out in protest, and the right. It's interesting, again, to go back to these places and look at these places and try to find the marks. For example, on the wall, there's nothing there at the moment, but you might see little elements of the paint work that might exist. And where those policemen are standing now, their trees have grown there. This is one of the many demonstrations by the Asian community as well, and this is a protest against deportation, as was taking place at the time. What I try to do is to frame the photographs as well in a way that that it's England. It's not ambiguous. Coming back. Yeah, sorry, I won't mention it. So it's England. You know where you are. So the framing of the photograph is quite important. Dave Butcher, with the police. Mine was never really, if you like, I wasn't a news photographer as such, but if incidents like this happened, then I would grab it. And you have to be careful as well at the time, because they quite easily take your camera, break your camera, or whatever it is, so you have to be quite cautious, in terms of your own personal safety. This young man appeared in the law courts, Birmingham law courts, and again, as I said, the framing of the photograph is important. It's the way by which you invite the viewer into the photograph. And here I framed it in such a way that it looks like the whole weight of the court is on his shoulder. There's very little gap between his shoulder and the buildings, and everything's on top of him. And I think he was alleged to have stolen, ashtray or something from a nightclub or something. Soho Road, the shops, the food, the way the environment is changing, people putting food out, the way they display the stuff, and the people engaging with that. Again, it's changed a lot since. Mrs. Walker, sadly she's no longer with us, and the only photograph of my mother, the one who gave my camera, the camera is in the top right-hand corner there. And this is one Saturday morning at the hairdressers, and these are people who would be working, otherwise they might have worked as nurses or whatever it is, and then on a weekend they will have another job where they do hairs or make cakes or sew dresses or something like that, just to make the ends meet, because they weren't just really providing funds for the community, for their family here, but also for their family back home. So they'll be saving to buy a house here, educate the kids, and providing, funds for people back in Jamaica or the Caribbean in general. This is a demonstration, anti-Nazi demonstration in New Street, Birmingham. And again, it's just interesting. I had an exhibition some time, and this guy came up, and he identified people in the photograph that he knew and grew up with, and again, it's just interesting to see that happening. This is from the same exhibition, from the same protest as it wound its way through the bouldering. And this is in Digbeth, where it's taking place, and what was happening, the National Front were having a meeting in the Digbeth Civic Hall, which is the same place where we saw the blues, the party taking place, earlier on. And I was quite adept at climbing trees back home, so, climbing the street furniture, whether it's be on top of my car or on top of, whatever it is in the street, including the bus stop sometimes, to get an advantage. I have to say I can't do that anymore. Again, this is from the same event. This is at a wedding, and this photograph was used. A lot of the photographs have been used in various things. I don't know why I pick out some of them, but this particular one was used in Carol Tulloch's exhibition at the V&A some years ago, Black British Style. And it's just a young woman at a wedding, bridesmaid. Yeah, what can I say? Again, I think what I try to do when I take photographs is to try and represent the event that's there, the size of the event, the importance of the event, the size of the crowd if necessary, and so on. So I devised many ways where there are no street furniture to climb on this occasion. For example, I put the camera on a tripod and I set my aperture as quite wide, f/16, whatever, for those who are photographers here. And I held it on a monopod, and I just wind and allow it to click itself while you hold it quite still. And sometimes you manage to frame it quite well, as I did in this occasion. Saturday school, summer school and Saturday school were vital, were very important to the community by way of educating, because this is the only way we knew anything about our history. Imagine we were told that we didn't contribute anything to human civilization, and it was put as bluntly as that. And it was repeated for me when I went and had an exhibition in South Africa, and this guy came to me and he says, we didn't even make design the bed that we sleep in. So, we were hearing a lot of that, and whenever there was a little bit of information As you know, online now we get a lot of things. Oh, black guy invented the traffic lights and so on. You're like, wow, is that true? But you can't believe it because you've been told that you've not done anything. So even when a black man tells you that he invented something, you don't believe him, because it's not until a white man come around and say, oh yes, you did, and then you say, oh yeah, we did. You know, it was really bad. So for me, it's how do we get around? How do we teach ourselves? How do we become confident about our own history, about our, how do we write our own history? So for me, the idea of these photographs were, if you like, to be proof of the event, of things happening. And where I couldn't prove it necessarily, if you like, the archives, what do you call it? Ephemeras were, if you like, to back up the stories within this. So for example, at these places, I would try and collect some of the leaflets they use, the pamphlet they designed, the newspapers, minutes of meetings, stories, you name it, and I've tried to collect all of these things. So this would have been what's called a summer holiday, a summer school, which is where in the summertime, qualified teachers would provide a space for youngsters to come and learn. They would play, they would do the 3 R's, but there would be a lot of history. About black history. They would take them to museums and museums and seaside and other things. So it's an entertainment, but it was also a place of safety, where the parents can know that the children are looked after while they go out to work. Nine-night. Now, when someone dies, you get nine-night. You have a nine-night on. It's assumed that the spirit leaves the body on the 9th night after the death of the individual, and you get together. But a nine-night on this occasion, these are all the old proper nine-night. We get a lot of things banded around as nine-night at the moment. Or should I say, I shouldn't say that. It's changing, the concept of nine-night. So these guys, they sing from the Bible. It's more like a mourn, really, and they drink lots of white rum. And wherever it sounds like it's making sense, then they just stop the whole thing and it starts again, and it just becomes like this mourn, dragged out words and songs and so on. And I managed to take this one. They're no longer around, and the practice has changed tremendously. It's normally now there's normally a lot of food. You'll find dominoes being played in one room, the family's being consoled in another room, the widow or widower, or the person left. And you find sometimes the church people singing in another room, the children are running in between, and food is being cooked and so on, and this just goes on and on. So from the moment someone dies, then someone would turn, people, friends, neighbors and so on will turn up with food, some cooked, some uncooked, and they will be with you until after, long after the funeral, until I think it's safe for them to go. This is, again, family members waiting for a funeral. This is the House of the Dread. This is a Rasta woman ironing. I basically wanted to, as I said, to cover all aspects of the lives, and I found a house where, where Rastas lived, and I asked permission to take the photograph, and obviously this is one of the many photographs that I took. Church convention. So what happens now is every year a particular church, they'll have branches at different in different cities around the country, and they would come together for a massive convention. Sometimes it's in a city, and sometimes I know a group that goes to Brighton every year, and they hire this big hall, and they have this. So this was one that was held in Birmingham. The building no longer exists there. Again, this has become quite popular, and it's even there's someone's done a sort of a painting of it on a wall by a Caribbean shop in Birmingham, and this is Cipher Sound, and I was just intrigued by the hats and things, and again, the position of the photograph is waiting for that moment where all the heads are separated and not covering each other, and then you have people walking in front of you. And you see that, this one is moving and he's coming closer to, and he's just going to cover someone, and then you have to match that against the speed of this person who's coming in from the left, who's going in at which point to press your shutter. So it gets a little bit complicated, but it works sometimes. Here is the West Indian Federation. It's a building that was used for young people for entertainment, dance, for them to come and play table tennis, and just to be off the street to engage them. But it was pretty poor, as you can see, if you look at the ceiling. And the idea with this was these photographs was part of a sort of a campaign to get some money to renovate the building. This is another of the same building. And again. This is a photograph which is used as a poster. And again, as I mentioned before, this for me was just incredible when I saw these young men. I had been working as a play leader in Handsworth Park, and fortunately I had my camera with me on that day, and I saw these guys, I ran to get my camera, and when I came back, they didn't move. And fortunately, I didn't interrupt, they just stayed, and I was so happy that they didn't move at all. So yes, hence I have this photograph. And for me, what it did, it's very important. They're sitting on a seesaw, and their life for me was a seesaw, really. They're damned if they do, and they're damned if they don't. There was no place for them. They were being chased around by the police and anyone else in uniform, really. And then on the other hand, their parents didn't believe them. When they went home and say, well, this is what's happening to us, this is our reality. And, this limbo that they seem to exist in on this seesaw was well represented, in life, was well represented by the seesaw here. 1985, we didn't have a riot as you guys did in 81. We had ours in 85. It was quite bad. I mean, I witnessed the, how am I for time? Okay, I witnessed the start of it. I mean, I'd been working up in Manchester, and I came back, and I was standing by this old cinema, and there was a fire in the old cinema, and the fire brigade came, and they parked, and they had this sort of a board that they put, all the individuals who's gone into the fire, into the building, they put a board there just to say, well, this person is in, make sure they come back out. So anyway, these kids came and they were asking, what's that, whatever it is, and I foolishly was going to answer, but they didn't really want an answer, because shortly afterwards they were starting to throw stones. And it all stemmed from an incident which happened earlier on in the day when the police were trying to arrest people and apparently had abused, some of the youngsters in the process. And I think it was just a combination of, months, if not years, of this abuse taking place. And the result is where I think 2 people died on this occasion. I think it was 2 people died, yeah. Again, the Rastafarian portrait. As you know, we didn't have a lot of places that would, where we could have events and things like that. So what would happen is artists would come and we would have events in school halls and, wherever there was a hall that could be hired large enough to take a crowd that will give a return on the investment, it would take place there. And on this occasion, Linton Kwesi Johnson was one of the performers there. This was Holyhead School. This is Carol Phillips in Birmingham. I don't suppose I need to say who he is. He's now in Harvard. He lectures in Harvard and written many books. Most of my work around religion, and in particular the black churches, is at this church, which is or was is my grandmother's church. She's no longer around. It is my mother's church. But I decided again on like moving around to different churches. I would stay to one church where they would be familiar with me and what I'm doing, and we'd build up a relationship. So I can come and go quite easily. And so yeah, this is the choir. I particularly like the crocodile shoes the preacher is wearing. You can't see it properly from there, but. This is Muhammad Ali when he came to open the Muhammad Ali Center in Birmingham, and he's in the center of the photograph there with his hand up. And again, I never am really invited to these things, and invariably, I don't think people in the community necessarily thought photographers were important. It's just a picture, where I go with it. But so they never really say, come along and take photographs. But whenever I heard about it, unfortunately, it's sometimes good that I wasn't invited, because I think, on this occasion, I happened to climb on the top of my car, to take this photograph. Morris Minor, by the way. The pubs, again, were quite important. And again, I would try and photograph, what was happening in the pub. And some of them were, I know the lives of the people, I know the experience, I know. And sometimes, when you see someone who's frequently in the pub and he doesn't work or something, and you think about his life, and the hope and aspiration that there might have been when he left, he left the Caribbean, and for whatever reason, he's where he is at the moment. It's quite difficult to watch. And as I said earlier on, it wasn't always easy to take photograph. Now, this occasion, I asked the owner, who was, I think it was Greek Cypriot, Chris. I said, "Do you mind if I take some photograph in your cafeteria?" And he says, "It's your camera, it's your life." And I proceeded to take some photographs, and I was coming out, and this young man, he saw me, he was taller than me, and he was a bit tall at Beresford at the back there. He looked at me, and he pointed his finger at me, and it was almost as if his finger was penetrating my skin. And you don't know, you have been watching Richard Attenborough, and I think, well, if you look away, then you're a coward. If you look down, if you look at him, are you threatening, and all the rest of it. And where do I look? And so it was this, and he says, if I ever see you anywhere, if I ever see a photograph of myself anywhere, even a photograph of myself as a baby, I'm going to kill you. I mean, you might laugh, but in the very building, there have been many people who've been shot, macheted, and various other things had taken place in that building. Apparently, it was alleged that this was one of the first places they found crack cocaine in Birmingham. So, so to have warned that this is my camera, it's my life, was a fair warning. So after that now, whenever I went around for about a few months, I would just question, what am I doing? Who am I doing it for? Who are these people I refer to as the community? Who put me in charge of this? Why am I doing this? Because what I would do is I would make sure, if I'm going to take a camera, I'll make sure I scan the horizon to make sure he wasn't around. So yeah, it was a bit rough. This is, and on this occasion, it was a pub. I just was walking, I popped in, let me see what's going on in here. These guys are playing domino, and I thought, I got myself a half a pint of beer, and I was there, and as soon as I came in, the guy on the left, you can't see, there's the shadow of him, he said, "Nobody take no photograph of me, And I said, "What make you think someone want to photograph you?" I mean, after all, too pretty. But there's a banter because I wanted to take the photograph, and you can't just take no for an answer. So we talked, and I thought, you know what, this is going to be a sort of a waist level shot. So I couldn't see what I was taking. I just looked at the people and tried to frame them It wasn't digital, so I could look at it and see if the framing was right or anything like that. So I just managed to get it right. But interestingly, afterwards, you will get the children of these guys will come and say, oh, can I have one of these photographs? I haven't got a photograph of my parents, and so on. Young girl sitting on a wall. It was just a beautiful, evening. We were walking by and these kids were playing. There's another version of this with a young black guy, which is a sort of a landscape photograph with a young black kid who's on the boy on the ground with them. And this is back to Austin Road Church, not in the building, but this is when they take to the street. It's they're winning the souls for Christ. And again, if you look at in the photograph, you see that the idea of that building in the background as well, that I mentioned earlier on about including, the landscape. And again, many of these people are no more, and I get constant reminder that, that the photographs were important, to have taken them. This is the occasion when Letitia Shakespeare and Charlene Ellis were murdered outside a hairdresser's. This was on the New Year's Eve, I think, or New Year's party, after party that took place. And on this occasion, it's when the whole area, which was cordoned off by the police, when it was handed over to the community, and they first visited it, and I went along. It was snowing at the time. I think it was either snow or rain at the time, as you can see there. But again, in an attempt to take a shot, you had to climb some buildings. But strangely, going back to this space and looking at it, the photograph looks so much bigger than the space. The space looks tiny compared to this space, the actual space. I mentioned earlier on the young man with the flag. On this occasion, his son was shot, killed, murdered by another youth. And this was the occasion of the funeral. And again, I photographed him. I wasn't able to photograph his mother's funeral, but whenever there's any occasion like that, he will let me photograph. He'll ask for me to photograph it. We are still in touch. He's over 60 years old now. And there you can see him with his wife and his brother-in-law. Nation of Islam. This is Tread. He's a Rasta priest. Now, the park, for me, I refer to it as the front garden of the community. Not the front garden. Yes, the back garden. When you have a party in the house and you don't have enough space in the house to have this party, or you need a bigger space. Well, that's when we go to the park. You find the Marcus Garvey celebration. You find all the big occasions, the carnivals and so on. But I remember my mother used to dress us up on a Sunday. We used to shirt and tie and all the rest of it to go and have picnics in the park. So, yeah, the park has been very, very important. And I recently did some work up in Leeds. And again, the relationships with the parks are just incredible because we're rural people. We come from roaring landscape. Not houses. I mean, the fact the shop that we lived in, the back garden was really no bigger than that. Just this square here. So to move from a place where you have to shout your neighbors to a place where you're literally living on top of one another. You need some green spaces. But somehow the countryside was never the place to be because we had just, if you like, we're in the throes of conquering the city or understanding the city, and then all of a sudden you want to go send us out in the countryside. They've got dogs, haven't they? Come on. We see all these hunts, and they've got dogs. The first thing is, when you go to a house in the Caribbean, you don't enter the gate unless you shout, "Wall dog." You can't even shout for these people to hear you because the house is so far from the road. You know what I mean? And what business have you to be going to the countryside to see anyone there anyway? So I think our relationship with the countryside is a fraught one. I think you guys, the younger generation, are sort of, getting beyond that. You don't. You don't know yet. Well, anyway, we'll come to that later on. But the park and open spaces for me are very important. And I find that. So this is an occasion when it was alleged that a young black girl was raped by a group of guys in a shop in Handsworth, and there was some protests, and these Rasta women were part of the protests that took place. This is the event. Again, another. I'm told I'm good at crowd shots. I'll accept that one. I like crowd shots. I just think it's important to show the magnitude of the people, the turnout, the importance of that, the support that you get in these places. And this occasion, I managed to persuade someone to allow me to go through their flat to their balcony window to take this. And these are some of the meetings that took place around that time. And what I did, there was a Radio 4 program only a couple of weeks ago based on this, really. And what I did at the time is I forgot what it's called, so I can't tell you. I see you taking notes. What I did is, at the time, is I recorded it. So I'd been wearing a cap, so I pinned my microphone to the cap, and I had my mini disc recorder in my pocket. And I recorded it as I went along. I took photographs, and you can hear the clicking of the camera in the whole process of taking this. Because I felt I needed a little bit more. There was so much conversation, so many conversations taking place of all manner of places, at the time. And so I just felt the need to capture some of that. And this is outside the church on Lascelles Road, where the youngsters, the police arrived, and of course, they just target for young people. But what was interesting, the guy in the middle there with a white apron, he was trying to protect the police, from the youngsters who were throwing stones at the police, which was quite interesting. But what they did is, the one here, this is when digital was just coming in, do I change to digital? So anyway, I had this digital camera, and I realized that it wasn't coping too well with light. But what happened is they come and he bent down and they lit a firework and directed it into the police crowd. But I missed the shot. This is the day afterwards, and it was largely, it was largely between Asians and African Caribbean, and I think it damaged the community's relationship quite a lot, and I think it's still damaged. It's it need some recovery, but working on for some recovery. But what I liked about this one is the morning afterwards with these two kids. It's this black kid who was going to do his paper round, and his little Indian friend. And they're actually watching the BBC doing some interview outside the church. The military, we've always been in the military, we wondered whether we would be conscripted as kids when we come into England. And I tell you another story we thought about was, because a lot of the work was in factories, and we were told that if you get injured in the factories, you could get a whole heap of money. So if you lose a finger, you get a lot of money. So we were debating which finger we would lose. I thought we didn't need the little finger too much. We thought we didn't need the little finger too much, so we could lose the little finger, and then our problem would be solved. Because invariably, it's about money. Coming to England was not for fun. It was about money. So if you could lose a little finger. I've heard guys talk about the street paved with gold. He said he came here for one reason, was to take the gold back. No, he didn't. There was no fussing. There was no messing. If it's paved with gold, he's going to come and to take the gold back to Jamaica. So, it was about money. It's about capitalism. It's about exploitation. It's all the rest of it. But they realized, like they say, the gold that they saw really was just a reflection of the lamps in the water that's on the ground. It wasn't the gold that they thought, that they were expecting. Africa Liberation Day, as I said, took place in various places. On this occasion, it's in Birmingham, and they would have international people speaking from, I think on this occasion he was from Zimbabwe, but from, the Caribbean, from America, from Africa, with all the political groups at ANC, Frelimo, ZANU, ZAPO, and all of those political groups. They would meet and they would talk about their experiences, and they would share. They would be sharing of stories, they would be sharing of food, they would be sharing of culture at these times. This is one of the only occasions you see that it still takes place, and it's an Easter parade which takes place in Handsworth, and you find a mix of the Asian and the African Caribbean community, Indian churches in Handsworth, and the African community. They do a march down the main street. I refer to these as the boys from the north. They like to make signs, as you can see, but they should be taken serious. It's more deadly than that, really. I'm not accusing anyone in these photographs, by the way. It's just that they represented that sign and the fact that the signs they're making. This is Robert Bedford before he cut his hair. I guess you guys will know of Robert. He's done a lot of programs on Channel 4, and he's working on a program for Radio 4 at the moment in Jamaica, I see. He's a theologian as well, formerly from Birmingham University. I think he's working with the Open University at the moment. Ted, he's a jeweler. And it was never really about photographing famous or important people as such important. For me, everyone was important. And I felt if I had to ask 3 people if I could get through the door to photograph you, it wasn't worth my while. I mean, I sometimes regret that in some cases, but I really didn't. For me, that idea of importance wasn't that important to me. These are a couple of youngsters. The photograph was taken on their 16th birthday, and the young woman in the polka dot dress, she is now 32 years old, and it's just interesting again to watch that progress. This is old folks in golden age, old folks' home. Now, this is interesting. Now, I told you about the blues earlier on. Now, the youngsters, they don't call it blues, they call it bashment. And I'd asked these guys if I could come and photograph their bashment, and they said, of course you can come and photograph it. So I arrived, I said, what time? They said about 11 o'clock. I arrived at 11 o'clock. They were still setting up this thing at 1 o'clock in the morning. They didn't get started until about 2:30 in the morning, but I managed to take a few photographs of there. What I love about this photograph, though, is the fact that the faces of the young men in the front are all obscured. And again, our parents' generation would dance around the handbag, which isn't in this occasion. There's a bottle of Hennessy and 3 cans of Red Bull, in the middle of the floor there. These are the boys from the South. Shubin, this is a place where you can go and get something to eat. They played, in fact, those guys standing at the back, they're playing Ludo. Yeah, Ludi, for those who, it's Ludo. And it's an incredible game if you watch it being played. It isn't what you might think, you just need to get a board and get some friends around. It's very, very entertaining to watch. This I find interesting. Whenever people see this photograph from a distance, there's always this this guy, it's the chain and the rings on the finger, but when they get in close and see that badge on him, the relationship with the photograph changed because it's got a cancer research badge on it. And it's almost, you can't associate someone with gold rings and gold chains around their neck looking like that with, wanting to support, the cause. This is David Hines of Steel Pulse at an event organized by Soweto Kinch at the flyover show in Birmingham, in Hockley, Birmingham. Children at the church convention. A funeral. And I've photographed numerous funerals. We don't mind photographing funeral. Our relationship with death is a little bit different from a lot of others. And it was largely, I think, because we try to get as many people to the funerals as possible, but a lot of people abroad can't come to the funeral, and so they would like to send photographs across to them. So, I've been tolerated and, welcomed. In fact, if I don't appear at an important person's funeral, I'm asked why I wasn't there. But yeah, this is a young man who was shot. This young man has a traded stall in one of the markets. And these guys, they owned a factory that polished metal for various things. Joan. This was quite interesting. In the background you see is Vaisakhi, which takes place, we have a very large Punjabi community, Sikh community in Birmingham, and I've been photographing Vaisakhi for many years, but on this occasion the two policemen, and there are hardly any policemen around, but on this occasion two policemen got hold of this youngster, and they kept talking to him, but he wouldn't speak. All he was trying to do is he tried to give them his phone, but they wouldn't take the phone, and he wouldn't speak, and I couldn't hang around. Back in the day, there were enough people around for this, nothing to have happened, so if you like. But what would happen if you're walking down the road and you see two policemen, they never really used to go out individually, and they're talking to a youngster. Invariably, you get a crowd around them, and they wouldn't move until, it's resolved one way or the other, and if it's not resolved, then you'll get more crowd at the police station and so on afterwards. And I remember one such time, this policeman was questioning me about my camera, whose camera it is, and he wanted my name, and I didn't see the point. So I wasn't answering him, and someone was walking by, and they heard what was happening, and he says, "Hey, George, what's going on?" And the policeman then said, "No, George, my name isn't George, but it's this idea that you must intervene somehow, you can't just walk past, because the next time it could be you." These are some young men at a flyover show. I don't know if this is the same year or another year. They're musicians. Now, what we'd have, again, the bookshops or education was, as I said earlier on, was not really provided for that well. And we would have, you couldn't go in a bookshop and find all the books that were necessary. A lot of the books were imported from America and the Caribbean and so on. And you'd have these these bookshops. So you'd have a bookshop like Head Start or something in London, and they'd pack up all these books and carry them to Birmingham in a van, and then, open up, this space. Now this is a nice one for architecture as well, isn't it? To design a portable library, So good for architecture. Oh, okay. Sorry. Just giving them a flag. We need it still. And this is the cemetery. This kind of reminds me of Jamaica. This is, if you imagine, the family came from Jamaica, from not far from where I lived, and it's this idea of the hills in the background. But then, this is the whole family that has accumulated over the years, since their departure from the Caribbean, which would have been in the 50s or 60s. The sound system. Now, I couldn't get the two sets of speakers in, so I just concentrated on one set. And interestingly, that young woman, the girl rather, right there, I don't know how she managed, because I have to say my liver was shaking from where I was, and I wondered if I was at a focal point that this should be happening. But she was there, and as you can see, she was just nodding her head to the music. I wasn't sure if she was doing it voluntary or if it's the music that was just, cause and effect. But anyway, this is one set at a carnival that took place in one of the parks in Birmingham. Chicken George, he's blind. He's a wonderful DJ and has been broadcasting to the community for many years on pirate radio stations, amongst others. He has worked on, BBC and, other legit programs, radio stations, but on this occasion he was taken at New Style radio station in Birmingham, one of the only black-owned public radio stations. This is a group of guys jamming session in a flat, and interestingly here we have people from Britain, from the Gambia, from Jamaica, and so on. You've got a really mix of people there. Handsworth Park, again, this old man just relaxing, chilling in the chair and watching from this position what you can't see, and I've since taken some other photographs of the same, because I'm constantly photographing the same people again and again, and I'll get sometimes, you don't have enough of pictures of me now, so I'll have photographs of them when they were children, when they're grown up, when they're growing up, and so on, and I have many photographs at different stages of a lot of people's life. Pauline Black at an event, and this is some youngsters, Jamaica in the square. This is where they have the Jamaican food fair in the square. Irvin Anderson, artist, Birmingham. If you're not familiar with him, I would say you're a little bit too late. You can't afford his work. I hear, I don't know if I should repeat this on a microphone, but I think I kind of believe it. He's that good. I hear he's being retailed at over £1 million. Barbara Walker, another, wonderful artist. She's recently become an academician, and she was in the Venice Biennial. She is, oh yes, and she's been nominated for the Turner Prize as well. She's local. So you see, and a lot of the people who are in Birmingham, in London here, they come from Birmingham, on a thief with people. This is Beverly Lindsay, local businesswoman. And I don't know if you remember a few years ago, the kids of the country went a little bit AWOL, and we had a couple of murders in Birmingham, and this is a get-together in the park with the family at some point after. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a really excellent presentation, and it's just been a real pleasure to listen to you talk about these photographs and the significance of them. And I think, as Bushra was saying, all of it's important to architecture. It's a story of places, of people, their memories, how landscapes and places have changed, but also recording the existence of Black people in England and the UK. And you said in your presentation, made some notes, that for you is about the documentation of Black people is the project, and the kind of, that's also, this wasn't your project, but it was our project. And I found this really interesting, this idea of kind of recording communities and places. And so I guess I start by kind of my observations of Vanley's presentation, but also open the floor up to any questions that you might, that anyone has. So thank you.
I'll start, but yeah, please have your questions ready. I think it's on. I was going to start with the question of the archive, nice safe one for us architects. Well, we were talking earlier about that you have this archive, this glorious archive that you've been recording and collecting for so many years, and the importance of it being accessible to not only the community that you've recorded within Birmingham, but also physically rather than just digitally. And I wondered, if you think that that balance between digital and physical is important, and if so, why? And what the battles have been in getting the physical archive going.
I have to say, I think the physical and the digital is important, and I'll just simply answer it by, one word, really, AI. You won't be able to believe what you read in the future, digitally, really, will you? I mean, and we have, there's nothing like, can you imagine when you move into your house? I'm not suggesting that you guys all have houses, I know the price in London, but, you move into your flat, and you lift up the carpet to change, and you find an old newspaper, and the world stops. Well, just think when you find a piece of paper that refers to you, that you didn't know exists, and you stop there. I mean, I still do it. I'm going through packing things away on the bookshelf, and I find that sometimes it's just a leaflet. Sometimes it's a book, something that's just obscure, or whatever. Just to have that physical, I think, is absolutely important.
Do you think it goes back to your point earlier about trust then, as well?
Oh, yes.
And who,
yes.
Who
Almost
you can
definitely.
trust, and who, I guess it's maybe in relation to even the physical archive, is what institutions then you work with, or who it is that you entrust the archive with.
Yeah, I think for me the archive is important. It's by the means by which we collate all the work that I and many other people have been doing. And as well as the photographic work, and as I mentioned, I have a lot of stuff. Yeah. Some of which is in the museum and art gallery, and my flat is absolutely full. I don't know if I can find space. And then I was recently asked to be one of the judges in a photographic books, and they sent me over 200 books. I mean, of which I can keep the books. Some of them are not worth keeping, but majority of them are. And what do I do? But as well as the ephemera that I've collected, which includes dresses, hats. In fact, there's a show that's going to be at the V&A, which includes some of that material. There's one in Birmingham at the moment. I have television people, I have people studying, I have various people who want to access this material. So they should be in a space where they can be used. Some people say, well, because your house is full, why don't you get a lock-up garage? But why do I want to collect these things and then lock them away? So I have this idea that they should be in a place. So I'm still making a plea, really, for anyone who has any of those old videotapes that people are getting rid of. I'll have them. I love the ones where Black people collect their own stories, where they record their own stories. I have a lot of those, a lot of tapes. Vinyl, I have an enormous amount of vinyl. But one thing I said as well that I'm hoping, that I think is vital, is I would like to collect one of every book written by or about Black people in Britain, for that to be part of that archive as well. Just to go to a place where you can just lose yourself, I think is an important one. I don't know if that answers your question or if that was a pitch.
No, can't wait.
I guess I could maybe go next before we open it up to the floor. That was really incredible, Vanley, and I feel really lucky to have been able to hear you speak about your life's work. I have so many questions actually in my notes, but I've decided actually I'm just gonna go for the last one that I thought of and just ask it. So my question is, what advice do you have for community organizers and people who are documenting and photographing their communities and the spaces and the infrastructures of support for their communities, in order to frame their own truths and to really take ownership and make visible what would otherwise be marginalized, and very often in the media weaponized?
I just say keep doing it. I encourage different people to photograph their own community. And one thing I forgot to say about previously is I think that material, we should be the custodian of that material. We should, whether we're doing it properly or not, we should learn, we should make mistakes about how do we provide that service. We won't necessarily get it right the first time. I didn't get it right necessarily, well, you know, in all the projects, but I'm just saying we should. But I encourage people. So, for example, I will talk to Gambian people and I say it's important. Now, I can photograph the Gambian person on the street. I can probably photograph them in a mosque. Or let me come to the Sikh community. I can photograph Vaisakhi. I've photographed the odd weddings or so on. But those personal moments and understanding the story, understanding the reason behind, you know, the events that's taking place, I'm not qualified to do that. So I'm basically just touching the surface, but I work with people. Yes, only a couple of days ago, I was photographing the celebration for the coronation, and the Sikh community had put on a big thing in Handsworth. And a young man who apparently had tried to get in touch with me a few times before, he greatly admired my work and wanted to do the same for the Sikh community, and I said I would give him a hand, you know, pointing as to the best way. I don't own what I do. I just try to do it because I think it's important. If you like, I've been privileged enough to recognize the need for this and to be able to do something about it. So I then, if you like, have taken up the mantle, and if I can advise other people, you know, to do the same, you know, I do that, and I do it quite frequently. Not just cultural groups of people, but individuals. So, for example, if you can't do anything, just collect your mother's recipes. That's a part of the whole thing. You know, collect your school books. You know, get all of those, whatever. I don't know. It could be anything. You know, collect doilies. You know, your mother's doilies, you know. And sometimes the simplest things are the most important things. Like, how many of you guys here know what a milk bottle is? You know, you don't. But that's all we used to have our milk in back in the day. So if you have a few milk bottles, and the story about, you know, having milk at school in those little milk bottles and things, they're wonderful stories. But you would never think about collecting the milk bottles. So it's the ordinary that is important. It's not the extraordinary, because everyone wants the extraordinary. You know, everybody wants a Ferrari, but can you remember what a Maruti 1100 looks like? Austin 1100, there you are. Yeah. And everyone had an Austin 1100 in those days. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know if I've answered that, but the most important thing, keep doing. And for a lot of people, I've always said, get rid of the TV. I don't like to give advice. As such, I make suggestions and hope that people will, you know, use whatever, but as far as the TV is concerned, it seduces you. And I kind of gave up. I was watching it one night. I was really into this film, and I was watching, and I fell asleep. I couldn't watch it. And in the morning, I couldn't even remember what the film was about. And I just locked the TV away in a cupboard, just in case I needed it again. And from then, I do watch TV, I have to say. Don't get me wrong, but I don't have one in my house. I'll watch it with my mother when I go to see her. And by the way, I have an allotment, which we haven't mentioned. But carry on.
We have to talk about the allotment.
We'll talk about that, because I'm going to ask one of you guys to come and do some experimental architecture on my space.
Oh yeah, it's open. I know a good architect over there is interested, I'm sure.
Okay.
Jamie Irving.
Okay. Sorry about that.
First of all, thank you so much for the talk. The second thing, no one has a TV right now. We all watch Netflix on our mobile phones.
Sorry, I can't hear. There's an echo.
So I said the first thing, thank you. The second thing is that we don't own TVs. We watch Netflix on our phones.
Oh, all right.
So I don't know. It's not the advice for our generation, maybe. I have two questions.
Yes.
So the first one, I've read somewhere that whenever the history of black people has been like portrayed, we always see the photographs taken in black and white as a deception that this was long time ago, before the invention of colored photography. It gives the sense that this was long time ago, and it somehow that I wanted just to ask you, like, why is all your photography is also just in black and white?
Sorry.
Yeah, this is the first one. I don't know if I should ask the two questions together.
You can. But my first one is, for me, I started off in black and white. And black and white gives you a framework that you can hang your story on quite nicely without the interference of color. You know, for me, this story is quite a serious one. And, you know, to pick at the colors, I think, you know, I just needed black and white, and I've ever since been doing it in black and white. But I have another substantial amount of work that I've done, but it's just not been seen in color. You know, I've got a lot of other photographs, but most of my photographs are in are presented in black and white. Even the current photographs are black and white.
Okay. The second question is that it's a bit personal. I'm a person of color, and I'm also like a child of diaspora. So I grew up bicultural, bilingual. My parents immigrated to a border city, so I was also raised between two countries, and I always I still don't have a sense of belonging to any culture or to any specific ethnicity or geographical location. And I see that for you is maybe it's the total opposite, where you have a community and you have people that you can say that those are my people. I see myself often talking about this topic, and I think that it formed a bit like a big piece of my personality and my narrative. But then I faced this quote by Slavoj Žižek. He said, "Don't fall in love with your suffering. Never assume your suffering is a proof of your authenticity." And it shook me a bit because I was thinking to myself that this entire narrative is my entire identity. It's a huge part of my identity. And I was thinking, like, if this thing been taken away, if I had different circumstances and I was not this person, with these circumstances, what is left of my identity if this thing was taken away? And I think always, I just wanted to know, like, if this thing ever crossed your mind also, or just because it's like a two different poles between how I was raised maybe and you were. I don't know, it just came to my mind.
I sometimes agonize, you know, and I sometimes think I didn't choose photography, it chose me. At times I would love to be a street cleaner, you know, but I remember I took some time out for about 3 years. I thought I was taking time out of photography, you know, just to try and do something else. At a particular time in my life. And I find when I decided that I can't do anything else, I had about 300 rolls of films to process. You know, so I hadn't really taken any time out. You can't stop looking. And I think if you feel that way, then I think you should do something about it. You know, I think perhaps the thinking alone won't solve the problem. It's acting on that is what might solve it, assuming it is a problem, or if you see it as a problem, or if it's, you know, to look at it. I think to do something is where you're at. And it can be quite simple. It can be just trying to, you know, retrace your past. You know, going back, which includes your parents' past or their parents' past, and doing something individually, or if further afield, you can, you know, go further afield. I'm working with a young woman in Manchester. She's from Mauritius. And again, you know, it's a new community in Manchester. And we were just talking about, you know, how she might engage with her community to try and work with the community. And one of the first things we did is don't set yourself up apart from them. You know, whatever you do, they should be a part of it. They should understand what you're doing, and they should engage with what you're doing, because it is their stories. It is that story that you're telling. I think if you look at it as an individual, you know, I think, you know, it doesn't really work well that way, really. It's just engage with the stories and try to answer the question. You can probably find another like-minded person, and you decide, well, you're going to draw up a framework as to how you might tackle, you know, some of the issues that are of concern to you. But not doing something about it won't make it go away. It only gets bigger.
There's definitely lots of people in that situation, so there's 100% community. We can talk later. Built a whole career around it so far, so yeah.
Welcome.
there. Hello.
Evening. My name's Beresford. I've known Vanley for coming on to about 2 and a bit years now. And I'm a father of 3. And the one thing I've learned from this man, who I would quite happily say, I had a lousy father, a disgraceful father. And Vanley, for me, is a healthy, decent replacement. And the one thing I've learned about him, and I've taken pictures for the last 25 years, is that the work that you do, it must have substance, it must have meaning, and it must have a role. So the work that I do inspires me to do my work. So every time I try and look at the composition, or depress the shutter, or I just observe and just look, he's the man. Because one thing about Vanley, it's not just his work, he's a 360-degree man. He's more than just what he does. He's inspired many, many people in a very unassuming and humble way. And I will travel miles across the earth just to do what I can to support him and his family and his mother and his brothers, because Vanley does everything so humbly, so discreetly, and he has inspired millions. And that is no exaggeration, millions. And one thing, this is the last thing I'm going to finish on. At our ages, we have to be conscious of our mortality. We're only here for a short period of time. And we must all come together to do good work. And that man sitting there does more work than so many people. And I love him.
Thank you. I have to say thank you very much. I mean, you know, it's been a pleasure meeting and knowing you. I mean, thank you. I mean, I have Richard here as well, who asked if he could film this place today. And again, he rang me and he said it looks like he's been stalking me for many years. He sent me some photographs of me when was that, 70s? You're not sure, but I was a technician at a college in Birmingham, the Birmingham College of Art and Design, which later became Birmingham Polytechnic, which later became Birmingham City University. And Richard was a student back in, was it 70s or 80s? 80s? Yeah, in the 80s. So we've been knocking around for a long time. And interestingly, as you said about influence, I went to a conference in Wolverhampton the other day, and this young woman came up. I think she was doing her PhD at the time. And she came and she says, oh, thank you for, you know, the last time we met, you said, I was a little bit apprehensive about my work and what it was going on, its relation to what I said, well, it's not for you to think where it's going to fit in. You just do the work and the work will find a space. Mm-hmm. And she just came and said, thank you for that, because it's helped her. So, you know, it's about how do you share, really? How do you engage with people? We're not alone, and we don't own the subjects that we teach. You don't own architecture. You don't have to cover up your paper when you see someone coming by. It's you discuss the whole thing and see how you can make the world better. It's not about you getting a bigger crown than anyone else.
There's 2 more questions.
Okay.
2 more questions, then we'll end one here and then in the front. Yes.
First of all, massive thank you just for capturing Black like joy and happiness alongside its pain. It's so nice to see them together, like a dance hall and a protest. Like that is the life of a Black person. But what I wanted to ask is, what have you missed? I think weirdly, because you remind me of my dad, and I often think he never tells me anything. They'll tell me a random story, and I'd be like, no one has written that down, or like no one has like recorded it. But I'd like to ask, like, is there something in your like whole history of doing photography that you feel like maybe you've missed?
Of the Rastafarian community. Yeah, I wish I'd taken many more photographs. I couldn't always necessarily afford the film. And you know, you have a family as well. You have to look after your family. Kids have to be picked up from school when something important is happening. You know, and you can't get to go. I have a friend in South Africa, Fani Jason, and he his wife threatened him once. You know, he was going to a wedding and he saw some fire burning in one of the township, and he diverted from the wedding to go to the. He was going to a wedding. He diverted from the wedding to go and photograph, the thing. And I remember I think it was one of the wars, Rwanda or some other places. And she said, "If you go, I won't be here when you come back." So there's a lot of things that I've missed, but I think if I had my time again, I would like to have taken much more of the everyday. I didn't used to include cars in my photograph because they're just this hump of, just blanks. But they are so important. They're ways by which you date things. You can see, as soon as you see a car in a photograph, you immediately resonate with its period, its time, whatever it is. It's the fashion, your clothes you wear. It's the food you eat. It's everything. So it's just photograph everything, collect everything. I don't mean you should hoard. My definition between a hoarder and a collector is a collector, you can still see the corners of the room.
Enjoyed that, and we come from neighbouring parishes because I come from Portland, and in fact I've gone back home. So. It's a nice place. Yeah. But the question I wanted to ask you is, don't you feel a prisoner in Handsworth that you've taken on this role of photographing people from when they were young, and as they grow up through their life, that you have a duty to continue to do that? That's a big responsibility.
You see, I decided much earlier on in this idea we talked about when we talk about revolution and so on, that for us to succeed, sacrifices have to be made, and mine is the documentation of the people. It was pure and simple. It wasn't a case of I would do it for a year. It wasn't a case I would do it for 2 years. I made a sacrifice that's my role, and that's what I'm doing. No, I'm not a prisoner. I've been liberated. I've been let out. I'm in London now. I have to say, though, as well as that, I'm now visiting Professor Birmingham City University. I have 2 honorary degrees. I did Desert Island Disc. I'm an honorary member of the Royal Photographic Society. So they let you out? So from time to time. I've also photographed what I haven't said. I spent some time in South Africa photographing the release of Mandela. During the period of his release, 1990, I went back 96. I was the only photographer who photographed all 6th birthday party he gave in honor of veterans of the struggle. I was invited back. I donated a set of photographs to Museum Africa as my contribution to the liberation of South Africa, and I was invited back by the University of Johannesburg, where they did a 5-day conference based on my work. I've exhibited in Canada. The National Gallery of America has got a couple of my prints in their shows at the moment. There's one in Minneapolis, and so on. I could go on, but I do get let out from time to time. Okay. It's a good place to start from. We fly over London. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.